Good afternoon. Let me start the meeting with international advisors of the NRA, Nuclear Regulation Authority. Let me speak a little bit about the international advisors of the NRA. The first set of the three the international advisors, comprising of the three international experts, had been decided even before the establishment of the NRA. And our government invite Dr. Miserve, Mr. Lacoste, and Dr. Waitman as international advisors. And we had quite fruitful period with international advisors in the beginning of 5 years in the NRA. And then we already have 6 years after the establishment of the NRA, and then we decided to have to keep having this system with a little different members. And in this year, we invite 3 international experts in the field of regulations. First, Dr. Richard Miserve. He was already in the first phase of the international advisor system. He was former chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and now President Emeritus of Carnegie Institute. And we already have a discussion with Professor Apostolakis in this year. He has, quite frankly speaking, Dr. Miserve is one of the most known, most famous person in the field of the regulation, and not even in the field of the science and technical academies. And we also invite Dr. Dana Dravova. She's from Czech Republic. She's in charge of the nuclear regulation as a chairperson of the State Office for Nuclear Safety. She has a background of the radiological protection for many years, and she's also chairperson of the CSS in IAEA, which is highest ranked committee to produce the so-called IAEA's safety standard. And also she is going to take a chair in the safety convention of the IAEA. So she's also quite active in the field of the international safety community. And Dr. Andrew Hall, former Chief Inspector and Director General of the UK's regulatory body. Let's see. I always say it is ONR, but anyway, she's in the top. She was in the top position of the UK's regulatory body. I think after Mr. Waitman, right? Yeah, right. And he has broad experiences and knowledge in the field of the nuclear safety, and particularly UK has a big long history to talk about risk and safety objectives or those kind of systems. So I really look forward to having the comments and views from the Dr. Hall. Okay, so this is just a very brief introduction of you, and my name is Toyoshi Fuketa, chairman of the NRA, and please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Satoru Tanaka. In Japan, there are many Tanakas. My name is Satoru Tanaka.
I'm Shinsuke Manaka.
My name is Nobuhiko Ban.
My name is Akira Ishiwatari.
And in this morning, you had a briefing from each commissioners. Commissioner Tanaka has a background of the waste disposal and fuel reprocessing. Commissioner Yamanaka has a background in the nuclear engineering, particularly in nuclear fuel. And Commissioner Ban has a background of radiological protection. And Commissioner Ishiwatari, he's a geologist and take a big role in the field of the natural hazards in this commission. So now I would like to ask you to provide your impression. And of course, Dr. Miserve already knows about the NRA, but today we have two new members. So we would like to hear about the impression and your views or comments on our ongoing activities. Please.
I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to meet with you again. I think I've interacted with all of you on other occasions, and as Dr. Fuketa has indicated, I have been involved in various activities in Japan since the Fukushima Daiichi accident. And that accident obviously revealed some serious issues that needed to be confronted by Japan with regard to its nuclear enterprise. And I should say, in sort of setting the context for this, that I am someone who appreciates that Japan is a country without indigenous energy resources, and that there's great value to it in being able to deploy nuclear power to meet its needs for electrical energy. But it should only do that if it can assure the safety of the operations of its facilities and provide confidence to the Japanese public that it is doing that. And I must admit, over the years since I have been coming here, I see sort of a remarkable change in a whole series of new institutions having been created in Japan to try to fulfill that aim. Namely, if you're going to have nuclear power, you have to do it safely. Of course, prime among them is the NRA itself, in that I have observed that it is a serious regulator dedicated to assuring safety, technically competent people serving in the agency. It confronts many challenges of revising the system, but it has capable people as its commissioners to try to drive that process. And I've been very pleased to have the opportunity to work with you and to offer assistance in that regard. I should say as well, there are other parts of the Japanese infrastructure which are also important in aiding you in fulfilling that safety obligation. JANSI is the new organization that has been created that is an analog to the Institute for Nuclear Power Operations in the United States that is created to try to drive each of the operators to excellence, and is working zealously in the pursuit of that matter. I also have an association with the Nuclear Risk Research Center, which is attempting to assure that Japanese utilities and the Japanese nuclear infrastructure in the whole has the opportunity to use risk insights as a vehicle for making determinations and assisting in driving the process towards state-of-the-art and at least state-of-the-practice PRAs initially, and then eventually the state-of-the-art effort, and is actively pursuing that. And recently there was a new policy organization that was created, TEMA, that is supposed to be a vehicle for dealing with the various policy issues and is intended to be a technically competent entity to provide policy advice on nuclear-related issues and interact actually with you on things on which insights from the industry might be helpful for you in fulfilling your obligations. So I think it's a total sea change in the infrastructure that is within Japan that is poised to assist in the fundamental obligation to assure nuclear safety. I've been very impressed with the efforts that the NRA is making. One that has attracted a great deal of attention internationally, and appropriately so, is your efforts to revise your inspection system. You are attempting to take a process that was developed in the United States, the reactor oversight process it's called, and to implement that here in Japan. It reflects a really fundamentally different view about the purpose of an inspection program. That is, it is guided by risk insights, and recognizing that the attention on safety matters should be driven by evaluations of the things that are important to ensuring safety. Almost a self-evident proposition. But rather than looking for assuring that minor regulatory violations are corrected, it's making sure that attention is being spent as a whole on assuring safety. Of course, you need regulatory compliance, but that the regulatory attention should be driven by what's important. And the implementation of the inspection program will facilitate that. There are going to be challenges for you, as we have discussed in our meeting before, and that is that the tools for assessing risk, namely probabilistic risk assessments, are ones that are only being developed now in Japan. And that's the core of being able to use risk as part of your inspection program, is having a tool that gives you reliable insights on risk. You also have the challenge that any organization would have in taking a whole new system, it's a different way of doing work, and pulling it together in a way that is that everyone understands that there's a new way of doing things that's appropriate, and that's going to be a challenge for any organization. I know that you realize these things. You have set a very ambitious schedule by which to do this, or perhaps the Diet set it for you. And I think that you're going to have some challenges in being able to put the system in place by 2020, but I know you're working hard at that effort. I would say it's the right thing to do, and the fact that you have some additional difficulties in putting it all in place should not discourage you, that this is an important journey for you to take as a regulator. And every journey starts with a few first steps that are going to be challenging ones, and that's certainly going to be the case with you. One of the other things that I've observed, I've had the opportunity since the Fukushima accident to visit most of the sites, including many of the sites that are ones that are seeking to restart the facilities. And I have observed very significant changes that have taken place on those sites in terms of new systems to assure protection in ways that didn't exist before. Huge seawalls, lots more of safety equipment, a lot more thought on trying to deal with both the engineering side and personnel side of assuring safety. All of that has been driven by the actions of this commission, which is sought to establish requirements that are give the plants a capacity to deal with circumstances that they didn't have when they were originally built, and which are ones that you've seen as necessary for assuring safety in Japanese circumstances, and you're to be commended for your hard work on that. It's been a long process. You have a series of plants that are now ready. Some have restarted, 9 have restarted, and some others that have completed the initial part of the review. They have some construction that needs to be completed. So there's been great, in some, I would say that there's been huge progress that's been made. It's been made largely at the instigation of this organization, and I think you're all to be commended for the good work that you've been doing and will continue to do.
Thank you. So, please, Dr. Trabova.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chairman Fuketa, for your kind introduction. And I would like to say that I'm really honored to be chosen as one of the international advisors to the NRA. As was already mentioned, at present I have the privilege to chair Commission on Safety Standards of the IAEA, which is the top advisory body to the Director General and Board of Governors what concerns the establishment of the complete and comprehensive and consistent set of safety standards in all areas: nuclear safety, radiation protection, emergency preparedness, waste management, transport of radioactive materials, and so on. So first of all, I would like to appreciate the active participation of Japanese colleagues in the work of safety standards committees of IAEA, and especially the contribution of Japanese delegation to the Commission of Safety Standards, because their role is really active, and NRA staff members plays a really very important role. So my experience with the competence and knowledge of the staff members and commissioners of Japanese NRA is quite substantial, and I appreciate it, and I also appreciate the possibility to discuss with them the current issues what concerns the IAEA safety standards applications, and also the results of IRRS mission that Japan invited 3 years ago. I have also to say that my deputy chair of the Czech Nuclear Regulatory Authority was a member of the IRRS team to Japan, so I have direct feedback from him also on the results of NRI. As it was also said, my background is a radiation protection area and also emergency preparedness. By the way, I chaired a group dealing with emergency preparedness and response when IAEA prepared so-called Fukushima Daiichi report. So I have a relatively good knowledge about the development of the emergency preparedness and response in Japan before and after the Fukushima accident. And I would like really to appreciate what was done in the field of emergency preparedness and response after the Fukushima accident. And also I would like to appreciate the area of transparency and communication with municipalities, including the providing of monitoring equipment for environmental monitoring near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant and financing it. I would like to mention also a few, accomplishments that impressed me during the yesterday discussion with Commissioner Ban. One of them is the existence of so-called radiation council, which is a body that has the main task to set uniform technical standards to ensure consistent radiation safety regulators. The role of NRI is to choose council members and to serve as a secretariat, but the council members provide independent assessment of various proposed regulation requests, which is very important to have this independent assessment and direct input for the decision making in the regulations area. The second thing I would like to mention is the establishment of a Radiation Safety Research Promotion Fund, which is also very important thing because it's important tool for same motivation of coordinated research in radiation protection area, and also networking of various organizations that are involved from the academics and various research institute, and to have, as I have mentioned, coordinated approach to the areas that are needed to support the work of a regulatory body. So in concluding, I would like really once more appreciate the active participation of NRA colleagues in various international activities, and in the areas that I have mentioned, that means radiation protection and emergency preparedness and response, the achievements since Fukushima accident. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Hall, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. I would like to start by echoing Dana's opening remarks that I'm also very honoured to have been invited to join this panel, and I'm very pleased to be able to do so. In the early part of my work in nuclear safety, I was involved in research in severe accidents, and so I've had a lifelong interest in how severe accidents develop and what the consequences can be and how they can be managed. It has been very interesting coming back to Japan for me after a period of about 3 or 4 years. The last time that I met with staff of the NRA, I had the impression that they were a little nervous about the challenges that they were facing and timid about how they would approach those challenges. It seems to me that there's quite a different attitude in the commissioners that I have met yesterday and today, in that there is a new confidence in the organisation. The organisation knows what it has to do in order to respond to the lessons learned from the Fukushima Daiichi accident, and has already promulgated regulations that take those lessons into account. There are already schemes in place for undertaking inspections to ensure that the power plant will meet the new regulations. And so, as I say, I think that there's clearly been progress over that intervening period. I found it interesting discussing with the commissioners the different aspects of the work on external hazards, for example, and the new regulations that's being introduced there. The conformity reviews that are being introduced and how they will be risk informed and will provide evidence to the NRA on whether or not nuclear site licensees are meeting the requirements of the new regulations. And the work clearly goes further than that as well, in that it covers safety culture, both within the licensees, but also within the regulatory organisation, which is also important, because both the operators of a nuclear plant and the regulators need to understand that safety is the top priority. So it has been a pleasure to join in with the conversations of the last few days, and I'm pleased to see the progress that has been made, and I wish you well for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So, any questions from the commissioners? Well, let me start. Probably one of the issues we are still facing is how to introduce the risk insight into the not only the inspection but also the other processes, so-called risk-informed regulation. This is not only for the NRA but also the other regulatory bodies. It's keep existing challenge. How to use the risk insight in the regulation. For example, recent SECI of US NRC described about how to introduce the risk insight into their regulation. And so this is a lot of big issues to be discussed, but probably next meeting or I may be the let's see, propose we are going to discuss some specific issues, and risk-informed regulation is one of the subject, and also there are a variety of different ideas in terms of the risk-informed regulation. It's different. Obviously, it's different between U.S. and U.K. and also Czech Republic. So, well. Probably I really would like to hear a brief your comment about what the next step about the risk-informed regulation, and what is the most in your experiences what is the most difficult, and also we should concentrate on our thought on regarding the risk-informed regulation. Go ahead.
I think that the introduction of a risk-informed approach is a very good tool for a graded approach and for allocation of resources to important important issues from the point of safety. But introducing this approach, it means complete change of the state of the mind, because if you are used or your staff is used to compliance checklist-based inspection system, it does mean really something very, very new, and it's very important to give a good training basis to allow for this change of the state of the mind.
Let me say, I think it's. I'll remember to push the button in the future. Let me say, I agree with Dana that this is proceeding along this path does require a whole entirely different mindset about how you approach regulation. And we tend to forget to mention the words performance-based as part of this process as well, which is another aspect of how to proceed. One of the challenges you confront, as I mentioned earlier, is that in order to apply a risk-informed, performance-based approach, you need good tools for assessing risk. And you're in that process now. I'm confident that they will be developed, but they're the essential foundation. I think that the experience is that you should probably, as you go forward, take a series of small steps as a vehicle for applying. You're not going to be able to take a whole regulatory system and one gigantic rulemaking, change everything. It's just not going to be the way it proceeds. And so you might start on some smaller steps that give you confidence that you know how to proceed, develop the interactions with the licensees and others that are necessary in order to provide confidence that this is a way to proceed. So maybe you'd start to do some in-service inspection, for example, as being something you could use risk insights for. Maybe you look at special treatment requirements, that and determine what the gradations of special treatment requirements using the risk significance of the particular structure component system. So in any event, I think there are a series of steps, and I think that your notion about having a future meeting where we discuss how best to proceed this would be a very useful way to take the next step after the inspection program.
I think that it's important to recognise that although risk-informed regulation is clearly the correct approach because it makes sure that the regulators' resources are placed where they can have the greatest effect, the interpretation of what it means does vary from country to country. And so in many countries, risk is interpreted as probabilistic risk assessment, whereas in other countries, such as the UK, it is interpreted a little more loosely. As a result, although the UK also implements risk-informed regulation, it is based more around understanding the safety case of different plants, what are the major faults that can occur and their contributions to risk, what are the major plant systems that can control those faults and terminate incidents if they arise. And as the UK regulator, ONR, has also been able to make use of information which has been previously reviewed by the inspectorate on the systems important to safety because the plant maintenance schedules for the different reactor plants and the non-nuclear power plants as well. The maintenance schedule has to be based on systems important to safety. So the operator has already identified what it thinks they are, and the regulator has already reviewed those during periodic safety reviews. So there is a list that you can start with, but it does need to be informed by an understanding of the safety case, even though in the UK we don't do it as much on the basis of PRA.
Well, thank you. Let's see. Now we are trying to have a not the risk-based regulation, but risk-informed regulation, as you know. So it must be a good combination with the adequate defense in depth, or I should say the adequate safety margin, and also we should know the incompleteness and uncertainty of the results from the probabilistic analysis. And also, this is kind of topic about the world of the risk. You know, many people think about the different, recognize a different way on the word risk, identical word risk. Risk is risk in the people in engineering safety, and risk in the people in radiological protection. Obviously, there are a gap of the understanding or gap of the definition. So we need to solve. We need to face also to the communication problem. But probabilistic. I mean, the result from the PLA has the potential to be the common words among the people working in the site or regulator and the licensees. So we think the risk-informed regulation is an important challenge, but also we need to be careful. And I appreciate your comments on the way to introduce the risk-informed regulation. Any other questions or?
Thank you very much. Good advice or comment about the risk-informed approach. Okay. Also, in Japan, we have the many nuclear facilities and also research reactors. And how we can apply the risk-informed approach is very important, but not so easy to do that. So your advice such as share those tips and like that is very important. Also, to the more realistic way, I understand it's very, very important for applying to the such a facility. Thank you.
Well, let me just comment that as you start to think about taking a performance-based, risk-informed approach, it can illuminate the entire regulatory program in ways that are helpful. But I would urge that you be cautious about learning to walk before you run. I would not take on applications to research reactors or fuel cycle facilities until you have a little more experience on basically the established ways of proceeding with regard to power reactors. I mean, it just would be an immense undertaking to now develop full risk assessments, probabilistic risk assessments for fuel cycle facilities, for example, and then use all of that to revise the whole regulatory system. So I just sort of suggest I'd be careful about how far you go, certainly initially.
I would like only to mention that for graded approach, you don't necessarily need a very sophisticated probabilistic safety or probabilistic risk analysis. You can do the graded approach with much simpler tools for other facilities than nuclear power plants.
That's certainly true. And of course, that's what we do in the U.S.
So talking about the risk issue, as Chairman Taketa said, there may be some confusion about the concept of risk. Particularly, the definition may be different between nuclear engineering people and radiation protection people. But for me, risk is quantitative scale to represent the level of safety. So it will be important to interpret it not an end, but it's just a means. So how to utilize it? So we need to have a consensus on that point.
Yes, I agree that in interpreting PRAs, it's important to not place too much emphasis on the numerical values that you get from them, but rather see them as a guide to the insights that you can gain into how the safety of the plant is dominated by some faults or others, and how the safety of the plants can be improved by changes, perhaps, but not to put too much faith in the absolute numbers of the resulting from the PRA.
Okay. Well, as you told, I mean the results from the PRA is useful when we compare the relative importance of the SSC system structure and components, but too much emphasis on the absolute value of the result of the PRA. It's a little dangerous, and we must be careful to how to talk about the absolute value of the result of the PRA. And PRA is the effort to quantify the risk, but it's with the probabilistic manner. So sometimes we always talk about the center line value, median of the risk, but we need to conscious about the uncertainty or risk distribution. So I think this is also another important point. Please.
In Czech Republic, we use PRA as a tool complementary to deterministic methods. Just as you said, Chairman Fuketa, to get a deeper insight in the importance of various structures, systems and components, and the consequences of their failure.
Thank you.
Let me say, I very much agree that one has to recognize that the output of any of these models is typically a distribution. And you're interested not only in median values, but what the extremes are, and need to fold all of those into your thinking. And you have to also recognize that the models may be incomplete, that there are things that are important that may be revealed by a deterministic analysis or engineering judgment that are not ones that may not be captured in a PRA. So there is a sophistication that has to be applied in as you're using them. I mean, it's a very useful and powerful tool. But like all tools, can be applied in appropriate ways and inappropriate ways.
As I talked this morning, we are working to introduce a new inspection system. So as you suggested, there exist many difficulties in a practical operation of new inspection systems, such as risk-informed inspection. So could you suggest some method for practical operation of risk-informed inspection from 2020?
Let me say, I think that you are proceeding to introduce some pilots where you're trying to apply the techniques. And you're going to learn a lot from those pilots as to the problems of trying to apply the system where actually the sophistication on being able to evaluate risk may be limited, whether it's inexperience with the inspectors, with the new procedures and so forth. The NRC had the luxury when it introduced the ROP process of the fact that it had something called the SPAR models, which was basically simplified PRAs that had been performed for every plant. So it had a tool in hand that it could apply right from the very beginning. You don't have that. And so you learn some things as you implement this process that were lessons that the NRC did not have to confront. And exactly how you proceed in the face of that, I can't predict, but I think you are going to have experiences that develop as you go through the pilots, which is very wise for you to do, that will help you sort out what you really are going to be able to do in what time frame. And in the meantime, of course, actually developing all the necessary tools is going to be also very essential, and doing it as they have to be accurate, but you should do it expeditiously.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have to try hard.
Well, may I change the topic? And you have mentioned about the Fukushima Daiichi accident, and that accident have essentially caused by a big tsunami induced by an earthquake. And I think in this country, Japan has a very large risk of natural hazard. And I'm responsible for the nuclear regulation against such kind of natural hazard. And I think the natural hazard is not only for Japan, but also in all countries. For example, in Europe, this summer was very hot, and some European nuclear power plants have stopped due to very high temperature of the river. Too high temperature for coolant water. And the other problem is a flood. For example, in France, I know a nuclear power plant has stopped for the problem in the protecting from the flood. And but in Japan, the degree of the risk of natural hazard is much higher. And This morning I have explained about some very recent natural hazard earthquakes and the floods that happened in Japan, and that it causes very large natural disasters. And do you have any evaluation or suggestion for our regulation practices against natural hazard? If you have any opinion, evaluation or suggestion, I would like to hear about that.
Well, I think that everyone around the world understands that you have particular challenges in Japan with certain kinds of external events that are perhaps more extreme than in most other countries. And one of the lessons that every country learned from the Fukushima accident was to go back and look carefully at their vulnerability for external events. In the U.S., for example, a lot of effort was spent on flooding risk as a result of it. And of course, there had been the experience earlier in the Blaise plant in France with the flooding issue. So I think that the way you have approached it, as I understand it, is to acknowledge the fact that Japan is one that has the possibility of extreme events that are actually larger than, more threatening than in other parts of the world, and to assure the existence of capacities in the plants that give some confidence that there is an ability to be able to respond to those accidents. So I would anticipate that, that given the seismic risks, Japanese plants would lead the world in terms of their capacity to handle seismic risks, as an example. You clearly are making modifications at your plants as a result of the tsunami risk, and making sure there were higher seawalls, under watertight gates, having power supplies up high. It's a series of things which one can, if one thinks about it, that one can do. And so I think you're approaching the challenge that you have in Japan, which everyone acknowledges you have, in the correct way, was try to think systematically about what the likely occurrence intervals are of severe events and designing systems that can accommodate them.
Thank you for your supporting and encouraging words.
Any other? Okay, so this is probably the last question from the NLA. Let me make it the one question. I believe the regulation on commercial activities and the regulation on decommissioning of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power stations should be different. And we take a so-called normal or take just normal direction or normal attitude to the commercial nuclear activities. But Fukushima Daiichi is different. It's special. And now we are facing the one difficulty, as you probably know. They have a difficulty of the disposal of the processed water. Processed water, we cannot remove tritium from the water, so it contains tritium as it was. And also the processed water includes the variety of different radioactive materials. And the government spent already a few years to discuss about how to dispose of this water. And of course, keep maintaining keep storing the water is also the option. And one of the sector of the government made a estimation about the cost and feasibility, technical feasibility. And TEPCO has not say anything about their direction. Because they say they are just operating or running organization of this decommissioning. And only the NRA showed our opinion, and we keep saying that the water should be released to the ocean after the necessary dilation, and the NLA accepted that this is disposal as far as the water released, as far as the water, the concentration of the radioactive materials are below the limit. This behavior, this is a little different from the usual regulatory body, and this is a controversial, and we received lots of criticism whether the regulatory body should say about our opinion on decision making or on options, one of options. Do you have any comments on that?
I would support the NRA approach because at the end everybody will find that the disposal under the strict rules is the only pragmatic solution. It's a question of negotiating, but still underlying that at the end there will be a disposal into the sea.
Well, I agree with Dr. Dubova on this. I mean, one aspect of this is, that if one observes the Fukushima site, it's been a number of years since I've been there, but one observes its total site is surrounded by tanks of decontaminated water. And if, maybe several thousand tanks that are there now. And that by itself creates a risk. And I believe that there have been workers who have been injured because some of those tanks were not intended originally to be used for an extended period. And tanks can fail, and their workers in and about them can be injured as a result. So it's not risk-free to just be able to store this water. It's expensive to do it. And beyond that, as you proceed with the decommissioning of the site, you're going to need to have some of that land around for have the facilities to effectively do the decommissioning in a way that's safe for the workers and that accomplishes the end in a cost-effective way. So I think there's a whole series of arguments that say that despite the fact that it's unpopular, that if you have water that can be released at below release limits, not have health effects as a result of the release, the technical correct thing to do is to release the water. I recognize that that's a political challenge for you, and I can't comment on knowledgeably about how you confront all the politics of this issue. But that's what I think that's the only explanation for why this hasn't proceeded already, is the politics are too hard.
Yes, I believe that the expressing of an opinion by NRA was the correct thing to do. And I think that the opinion expressed was the correct one, in line with my colleagues. As Richard has observed, there is a risk associated with keeping the material in the tanks on the site. And so, as well as risks to the public, risks to workers on the site must also be considered. And some attempt should be made to optimize the overall risk. And again, if the water can be released in accordance with authorized limits, that is technically the right thing to do. But I can understand equally that there will be people who will have some concerns about that. So it'll be important to engage with them and explain the rationale for the release.
Thank you very much. Of course, we must be careful about the opinions from all the stakeholders. This is not the solely technical problem, but also the social problem, and we must think about the market impact and also how the residents feel about the option. So I agreed with your comments that it's highly political and social issues, and the government and the TEPCO and all the stakeholders are working very hard to have discussions in order to take an option. But again, the NRA showed already our views on the selection of the option, and I believe the NRA is doing the right thing. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. But I hope it's been helpful too.
Thank you very much. So, thank you. Meeting adjourned.